Security, privacy, and anonymity can sometimes be in contradiction to each other. For example, a feature within your browser might check every website that you visit to see if it's on a known malware distribution site. This feature helps security because it can stop you going to sites with malware, but can potentially interfere with your privacy and anonymity as the site, the malware distribution site, is maintaining constant contact with your browser and could be constantly updated on what sites that you are visiting and when. And in situations like this, you need to make a decision between security, privacy, and anonymity. People's tolerance for being tracked and the disclosure of their personal information and activities online is different. If you're a political dissident fighting for human rights, you may need total privacy and anonymity online against your government. If you're an average internet user in the West, you might just not want your emails read and your surfing history revealed and find that to be an imposition. There is a spectrum of consequences to disclosure and de-anonymization, from mild privacy invasion to a life depending on it. The amount of privacy and anonymity you require is directly proportional to the amount of security you need. So bear that in mind as we go through the course and you choose what security controls that you want and need to apply. I'll say that again. The amount of privacy and anonymity you require is directly proportional to the amount of security that you need. The more privacy and anonymity, the more security controls. A quote here from Bruce Schneier. Privacy isn't about hiding something, it's about being able to control how we present ourselves to the world. It's about maintaining a public face while at the same time being permitted private thoughts and actions. It's about personal dignity. How do we know what security controls to assign to an asset to protect it? Well, you should know the answer to this. As discussed, we do a risk assessment considering the threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences to the assets and select appropriate security controls. But what exactly do our assets need from our security controls? These security controls need to enable what we will call security attributes. A way to consider the type of security control we might need for an asset is to think about the asset in terms of its needs for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's define those three things now. Confidentiality. Do we not want the asset disclosed to anyone? i.e., that the asset is not disclosed to unauthorized individuals, entities, and processes. If that is true for the asset, that defines the sort of security controls we need for that asset. The next one, integrity. Do we not want the asset unintentionally altered? Do we want to maintain and assure the accuracy and completeness of the asset over its entire life cycle? This means that the asset cannot be modified in an unauthorized or undetermined manner, determining the security controls. The last one, availability. Do we not want it destroyed? i.e., for any asset to serve its purpose, it must be available when it is needed. This means the systems used to store and process the asset, the security controls used to protect it, the communication channels used to access it, must be functioning correctly. Again, this is determining the types of security controls if that is a security attribute that the asset requires. CIA is known in the security industry as the CIA triad. It's a very old but still well-used security paradigm. And we can call these CIA, this confidentiality, integrity, availability, we can call each of those security attributes or the security properties that an asset needs to be secure. As the security expert, you need to help determine what the assets are and assign what security attributes that are required for the asset so that it can be secured to within acceptable levels of risk. You would do this by questioning the owner of the entity that you are trying to secure and find out what they require. What does security mean to the owner? That's why somebody can't say to you, give me a secure system, because you don't know what secure means. You have to ask them what secure means. And one method, one technique is to use security attributes and find out what attributes those assets need. Does it need C, I, or A? So you do a requirements gathering for the security needs or attributes of assets. You simply ask the owner what they want. This isn't always a simple process because you have to guide them with your expertise, and they tell you what security means to them for that asset. Many security attributes have been proposed over time, CIA being the original and well referenced, but it has its problems. The CIA doesn't cover all security needs, and it does not speak in the language of the business or the way business people like to talk. So in 1998, a guy called Don Park proposed an alternative model to the CIA triad that he called the 6 atomic elements of information, or the Parkerian hexade. The security attributes are confidentiality, as we've already known, possession, which is a new one, integrity, authenticity, another new one, availability, and utility, another new one. So of the new ones from the CIA, we have the first one, possession or control, as it can be called. Let's define these. This would be a loss of control or possession of an asset, but does not involve the breach of confidentiality. You've also got authenticity, which refers to the veracity of the claim of origin or authorship of the asset. And then you have utility, which means usefulness, which again isn't part of CIA. So for example, ransomware that encrypts a user's data, that asset then is no longer useful. It has no utility. So if you were just using the CIA as security attributes, you would not have usefulness as an option, but you would have availability, which is similar. So these security attributes can be used to define asset security controls, as we've said. Not in the Parkerian hexade is non-repudiation, another common security attribute we will see mentioned if you read security literature. So non-repudiation in law implies one's intention to fulfill obligations to a contract. In cybersecurity, it implies that one party of a transaction cannot deny having received a transaction or message, nor can the other party deny having sent a transaction or message. So non-repudiation ensures that the sender cannot deny sending the message. And there's also two other important and well-referenced security attributes, and those are authentication and authorization. Authentication verifies the identity of the user or system. Is it what it claims to be? Are you who you claim to be? Is the asset what it claims to be? And then you have authorization. So upon authentication of the identity or of an identity, authorization determines what is it allowed to access. So authorization, what is it allowed to access? Authentication verifies the identity of the user or system. Is it what it claims to be? So as you can see, there are many security attributes that we might want to assign to an asset or think about in terms of an asset, in terms of its security controls. And from these, this enables us to choose security controls that provide those attributes. So let's get a little bit more tangible here with some examples. So if something is encrypted, this can provide confidentiality. If something is hashed, this can provide integrity. If something is digitally signed, this can also provide authentication, non-repudiation, and integrity. If something is encrypted and digitally signed, this can also provide confidentiality, authentication, non-repudiation, and integrity. So you can see there how we've gone from an asset to an asset having security attributes to then having the security controls such as encryption and hashing and digital signatures that then meet those security attributes. Don't worry if you didn't understand about what hashes are or encryption. All of those things we're going to go through as we go through the course, but it's just to show you the path through which we have our asset, we have our security attribute, and then we have our security control that meets our security need, our security attribute. So as you can see, the way we're talking, we're not really talking in the way a business owner or a business person likes to speak. And it's often a business that is the entity by which we're trying to secure in cybersecurity. So this brings us to what I like to use for designing security architectures for businesses, and that's the SABSA business attributes. And here we are. If we look here, we can see security attributes, or as they call them, business attributes. But these speak a little better to the business to understand the security requirements, i.e. the security controls for assets. You determine if these business attributes here are required, maybe they're not required, are they a nice to have? So for your assets, you would look at their user attributes, management attributes, operational attributes. Do you need detectability? Does it need to be error-free? Do you need auditability? Should it be legal? Should it be scalable? Should it be governable? And so on. So that's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I'm taking you a little bit further than what you might get on a standard security course where they may just talk about the CIA. I want to give you a little bit more of the real world where you need some more than the CIA, through to the Parkerian Hexaid, through to even having business attributes that come from SABSA. If you're interested more in SABSA, then check out that link there. We're going to talk about threat modeling and risk assessments now. You should now have an understanding of vulnerabilities, threats, adversaries, consequences, and the resulting risk, as well as how security is the process, actions, and technologies that protect your assets, privacy, and anonymity. We will now dig a little deeper into how to apply some of what we have learned. First, very important point, you cannot ever have 100% security. Just like you can never have zero risk. Therefore, you can never completely protect your assets or maintain perfect privacy or have total anonymity. If you have ever seen someone advertising 100% security, run a mile. They have no clue about what they're talking about. Unless you stop engaging in an activity, there will always be risk. Engaging in life has a risk. Going on the internet has a risk. We take these risks for the great opportunities and benefits that the internet brings. In order to exploit the opportunity of using the internet, we have to accept a level of risk. And you need to personally decide what is your tolerance for risk based on your circumstances. The lower tolerance for risk you have, i.e. if the consequences of loss of security, privacy, or anonymity is high, then the more security controls you need. The more advanced and often restrictive to usability security controls you will want. The higher tolerance for risk you have, i.e. the consequences might be low, the less security controls you will need. So security is a balance. It's a balance between usability and security, between risk and opportunity. And security often gets in the way of ease of use, which is why we must choose security controls that are fit for purpose and are in line with our appetite for risk. This course in the section on Know Yourself and Know Your Enemy will provide you with background information on the threats and vulnerabilities that you might face on the internet so you can make an informed choice on your needs for security, privacy, and anonymity and tolerance for risk. So wait until we go through those sections, and then you will start to understand more the threats and adversaries that are out there and things that you may never have known about before. Another very important point now, you should take a risk-based approach to your security. We know we can't have 100% security, so you need to take a risk-based approach to applying the right level of security to mitigate the risk without it being overburdensome to the point where the system is unusable. But only you can choose how big and burdensome your security needs to be to protect your assets. In order to take a risk-based approach to security, you should do basic threat modeling and risk assessments when selecting your security controls. And I'll walk you through an example of doing that now. So risk equals vulnerabilities times threats times consequences. So let's go through an assessment process now. First, we start with our assets. You should now have a list or a rough list or an idea of your assets based on the earlier videos. You should have a rough concept of the things you care about and want to protect. Vulnerabilities, threats, and adversaries. You may have some understanding of what your threats are and your adversaries are, which might be one of the reasons why you're choosing to do the course. Or you may have no clear idea at all or be somewhere in the middle. In the section on Know Your Enemy, we cover many of the vulnerabilities, threats, and adversaries. When you go through that section, determine which apply to you in order to determine your risk. Determine the consequences of assets being compromised, of threats being realized. When it comes to your assets, consider if they are lost or stolen, destroyed or encrypted so you can't use them, placed on the internet, put in the hands of your adversaries, criminals, hackers, government, law enforcement agencies. How could it impact your reputation, your privacy, your anonymity? What would be the impact of loss of privacy and anonymity? What is your adversary likely to do? Concentrate on the consequences if the threats and adversaries are less tangible to discover. And that's a key point there. Concentrate on consequences in order to determine the risk and the security controls you need to use if your understanding and concept of the threats and adversaries are less tangible, which is actually often the case. You consider the consequences, the impact more. Once you have an understanding of your assets, their threats, vulnerabilities, adversaries, the security controls that are available to you, as you may not know what all the security controls are available to you or even how to configure them, which is part of what the course is, and you understand the consequences of threats being realized, you will be able to determine a general level of risk that you feel you are at. You might have identified particular risky behaviors that you perform, threats, adversaries, vulnerabilities that need the strongest security controls and most attention. Let me give you an example of something you may have concluded once you've gone through enough of the course to be able to start doing threat modeling and risk assessments. Maybe you're concerned about the threat of your laptop being stolen. The adversary would be a thief. The vulnerability is the data on the laptop being in clear text, and the consequences are reputational damage and maybe identity theft. Based on your tolerance for risk, you would select security controls that mitigate the risk, and you should apply security controls to the greatest risks first. The whole course is a series of lessons on security controls, how to apply them, why to apply them, their strengths and weaknesses, and so on. As you go through the course, select, implement, assess, monitor those security controls that we go through. When it comes to select security controls that best mitigate the risks. For example, of the stolen laptop that we were just talking about, you could select whole disk encryption using LUKS, an encrypted boot sector, and pre-boot authentication as some of your security controls that mitigate that threat. Then implement those controls. You install LUKS whole disk encryption and configure it. Then assess the controls you have selected for their effectiveness. Check that the whole disk encryption is working and the data is actually encrypted. Then monitor the effectiveness of the security controls. Check for security updates, for example, and vulnerabilities in LUKS, and so on. If a weakness is discovered, you go back to the select stage again. So that's threat modeling and risk assessments. Once you've gone through a percentage of this course, you should start to feel more confident in assessing the threats and adversaries, understanding where your vulnerabilities might be, and then start to understand where you apply the security controls to protect the things that you care about, privacy or anonymity or your files or email. So I hope that helps in making sure you select the correct security controls. Gives you the maximum benefit to protect your assets.